Beth Dutton's return in Marshals Season 2 is not just a surprise cameo, but the beginning of one of the biggest crossovers in the Yellowstone universe. Because after everything Casey went through in Season 1, the last person he may expect to see could be Beth. And if their paths really cross, it could connect Casey's federal mission to the Dutton family's latest battle in a way nobody saw coming. Season 2 already has Tate's kidnapping, Tom Weaver's growing threat, and Casey's team dealing with the fallout from that brutal ambush. But now, there is another question hanging over everything. What happens when Casey's hunt for Weaver takes him into Texas and straight into Beth Dutton's world? Let's be honest, the Season 1 finale left Casey with almost nothing under control. Tom Weaver was exposed as the real mastermind, Tate was placed directly in danger, and Casey's entire understanding of who he could trust was completely destroyed. The man Casey believed was a friendly neighbor was actually working toward a much bigger plan, and now Weaver has something Casey cannot simply walk away from. He has his son. That changes everything going into Season 2. Casey is no longer just fighting over land or trying to stop a criminal operation. This time, it is personal. Weaver knows exactly where to hurt him, and Tate could become the biggest piece of leverage in the entire conflict. That is why Season 2 could feel much darker from the very beginning. Casey has already rejected Weaver's offer for East Camp, and after choosing to turn part of the property into an equine therapy center in honor of Garrett, there is no reason for Weaver to simply back away. If anything, Casey's decision may have made him an even bigger target. And this is where Beth could enter the story. The idea of Casey crossing paths with Beth is especially interesting because they are both connected to the same larger family legacy, but they have taken completely different paths. Casey is working through federal operations, dealing with criminals, investigations, and threats that can quickly turn deadly. Beth, on the other hand, has always been willing to fight dirty when the people she loves are threatened. Put those two personalities in the same situation, and there is no telling what could happen. But there is an even bigger reason this potential crossover matters. Casey could be heading south because Weaver has taken Tate to Texas. If that happens, Casey will have to follow the trail wherever it leads. And Texas is exactly where the wider Yellowstone universe has been expanding. Beth and Rip are already dealing with their own problems, their own enemies, and their own fight to protect the family. So imagine Casey arriving in Texas while Beth is already in the middle of a dangerous conflict. Neither of them may expect the other, and that could make their first meeting explosive. Think about Casey for a moment. He has spent Season 1 trying to balance his duty with his family. He has lost people he trusted, watched his team get attacked, and now has to rescue his son from the man behind it all. He is going into Season 2 angry, desperate, and willing to take bigger risks. Beth understands that kind of mindset better than almost anyone. She knows what it means to fight for family when everything else is falling apart. That is why Beth could become more than just a familiar face. She could actually become an important part of Casey's mission. But there is another question fans are going to be asking. Will Beth even trust Casey? Because from her perspective, Casey is a federal marshal involved in an operation that could bring serious attention to Texas. Beth has never been someone who enjoys having outsiders interfere with her business. If Casey starts pushing into territory where Beth and Rip are already fighting for control, the first meeting might not be friendly at all. And that is exactly what could make it so entertaining. Casey could be desperate for information about Weaver, while Beth could have information Casey desperately needs. They might not agree on how to handle the situation, but they would have one thing in common: family. And if Beth discovers that Tate is being held by someone connected to a much larger land operation, she may have her own reasons to get involved. Because Beth knows what happens when someone threatens a family member. She does not usually wait for permission. Meanwhile, Rip could make this situation even more complicated. If Casey arrives in Texas looking for Tate and starts crossing legal boundaries, Rip may not appreciate a federal marshal interfering with his territory. That could create an immediate tension between the two men. Casey operates under the law, while Rip has never been afraid to operate outside it. But what if they realize they are fighting the same enemy? That could completely change the dynamic. Instead of Casey and Beth simply crossing paths for a short moment, Season 2 could use the situation to bring multiple characters together against Weaver. And if Weaver's operation is bigger than anyone realized, Casey may need every ally he can find. There is also the question of Tate and Carter. Both families could have sons caught in dangerous situations at the same time. Casey is desperately trying to bring Tate home, while Beth and Rip are dealing with their own concerns surrounding Carter. That parallel could give the crossover a much deeper emotional purpose. Because this would not just be about two famous characters meeting, it would be about two families trying to protect their children while powerful enemies close in around them. And that is where Marshals Season 2 could become much bigger than a simple continuation of Season 1. The Season 1 story was already building toward a massive conflict. Weaver has resources, connections, and a reason to want East Camp. Casey has refused to give him what he wants. Rainwater and Mo are preparing for another fight. Casey's team is recovering from the ambush, and Tate is somewhere in the middle of it all. Now add Beth Dutton to that equation. Suddenly, Casey's mission could become part of something much larger. The biggest question is whether Beth's appearance would happen because Casey needs her help, or because Beth discovers that Weaver's operation is threatening something she cares about. And if those two stories collide, we could be looking at one of the most unexpected crossover events in the entire universe. But before Casey can worry about Beth, he has to survive what is waiting for him in Season 2. Because Tate is still missing, Weaver is still out there. And Casey may soon discover that the man he thought was his biggest enemy is only one piece of a much larger game. The biggest danger for Casey in Season 2 may not be finding Weaver. It may be discovering just how far Weaver's operation actually reaches. Because if Tate has been taken to Texas, then Casey is no longer dealing with a simple kidnapping. He could be walking directly into a much larger network involving land, money, power, and people who have been planning their next move long before Casey ever realized what was happening. And this is exactly where Beth's return becomes so important. If Beth really appears in Season 2, her role could be connected to the same conflict Casey is chasing. That would explain why the crossover would feel natural instead of forced. Casey would not simply travel to Texas to meet a familiar face. He would have a reason to be there. And Beth could already be fighting a battle that is connected to Weaver's larger plan. That creates a very interesting possibility. What if Weaver is not only interested in East Camp? What if the land war is part of something much bigger? Casey already knows Weaver wanted control of the property, but after the Season 1 finale, it is becoming harder to believe that East Camp is the only thing Weaver cares about. He has already shown that he is willing to manipulate people, use Casey's son as leverage, and send armed men after Casey's team. A man willing to go that far probably has a much bigger objective. And if that objective reaches into Texas, Beth could find herself standing directly in his way. That would put Casey and Beth on a collision course with the same enemy. But there is one major problem. Casey and Beth are not going to approach the situation in the same way. Casey still has his badge. He has rules, procedures, and a federal operation behind him. Even when he becomes emotional, there are limits to what he can legally do. Beth does not have the same problem. When she believes her family is in danger, she is willing to make decisions that Casey would probably never approve of. So imagine Casey finally tracking Weaver to Texas and discovering Beth has already found part of his operation. Casey wants evidence. Beth wants results. Casey wants to bring Weaver in. Beth may want Weaver to regret ever coming after her family. That difference could create some of the best tension in Season 2. And then there is Rip. If Beth is involved, it is almost impossible to imagine Rip staying on the sidelines. He has his own way of dealing with threats, and he is not exactly known for welcoming federal agents into his world. If Casey starts asking questions about Beth, Rip could immediately become suspicious. But Casey is not going to Texas to investigate the Duttons. He is going there for Tate. That distinction could become very important, because Casey might actually need Rip's help, even if neither man wants to admit it. Rip knows the land. He knows the people. He understands how dangerous the Texas ranching world can become. Casey knows the law, investigations, and federal operations. If those two skill sets are combined, they could become a serious problem for Weaver. And Weaver may realize that before Casey does. That could force him to make a desperate move. Remember, Weaver already knows Casey's weaknesses. He knows Tate matters more to him than anything else. So if Casey gets closer, Weaver may stop hiding and start attacking directly. That means Tate could become more than just a hostage. He could become bait. Weaver could deliberately leave clues for Casey, knowing exactly where they will lead him. Every piece of evidence could push Casey deeper into a trap, and if Casey believes he is getting closer to Tate, he may ignore the possibility that Weaver wants him exactly where he is going. This is where Season 2 could become extremely suspenseful, because Casey has already been betrayed once. After Tom Weaver's reveal, Casey should question every phone call, every lead, every person who suddenly offers help. And that includes Beth. Even though Beth may eventually become an ally, Casey has every reason to be suspicious of everyone around him. His trust has already been shattered, and Tate's life is on the line. That emotional damage could change Casey completely. Season 1 showed us a man trying to keep his personal life and his job under control. Season 2 could show what happens when those two worlds completely collide. He is no longer chasing a criminal because it is his job. He is chasing Weaver because his son is in danger. And that makes Casey unpredictable. It also creates an interesting connection with Beth. Beth has spent years operating from a place of anger, survival, and family loyalty. Casey may now find himself moving in the same direction. The more desperate he becomes to save Tate, the more willing he may be to cross lines he normally would never cross. Beth could recognize that immediately. She might even warn him about what he is becoming. But would Casey listen? Probably not. Not while Tate is still missing. And that could lead to one of the most emotional moments of the season. Imagine Casey finally getting close enough to Tate to rescue him, only to discover that the entire situation has been designed to force him into a choice. Save Tate and allow Weaver to escape, or take down Weaver and risk losing his son. That kind of choice would perfectly fit the direction Season 2 seems to be heading. Because Weaver does not just want land, he wants control. He wants Casey emotionally broken, and he wants Casey to make mistakes. The more desperate Casey becomes, the easier he is to manipulate. But Weaver may make one mistake of his own. He may underestimate Beth. If Beth realizes that someone is using Casey's son as a weapon, she may see the situation differently. She understands exactly what family means, and she knows that when someone threatens your child, there is no going back to normal. That could be the moment when Beth stops being a potential crossover character and becomes a major player. And if she decides to help Casey, Weaver could suddenly find himself fighting on two fronts. Casey could attack him through the law. Beth and Rip could attack him through the world they understand best. That combination would be extremely dangerous. But there is another possibility that makes the crossover even more interesting. What if Beth and Casey do not immediately work together? What if they actually clash first? That would make perfect sense. Beth could believe Casey's federal operation is putting everyone at risk. Casey could believe Beth's methods are making his investigation harder. They could argue over Tate, Weaver, and how far they should go. And while they are fighting with each other, Weaver could be watching from the shadows, waiting. Because the longer Casey and Beth remain divided, the stronger Weaver becomes. That would give Season 2 a powerful central question. Can Casey learn to trust people again? And can Beth trust someone who works for the government? If they eventually answer yes, their alliance could become one of the biggest surprises of the season. But the danger does not end with Weaver. Casey's team is still recovering from the ambush, and Cal's health crisis could add another emotional layer to the story. Knowing that Cal is dealing with a serious illness connected to military burn pits could force Casey to question how much he is asking his team to sacrifice. Cal survived the ambush, but surviving is not the same as being okay. His condition could become worse. His relationship with Belle could be tested, and his ability to continue leading the unit could come into question. That means Casey may be fighting two battles at once. He needs to bring Tate home, but he also needs to keep his team together. And somewhere in the middle of all this, Andrea Cruz is facing her own decision about Washington. If she leaves, Casey could lose someone important at exactly the wrong moment. If she stays, she could put her own future at risk. Everyone is being forced to choose. Family or career, law or revenge, trust or survival. And that is what makes the potential Beth crossover so much more exciting. Because Beth has already made her choice. Family comes first. Casey may be about to learn the same lesson. The question is what he will be willing to sacrifice to prove it. And now we reach the biggest question of all. If Beth really returns in Marshals Season 2, how far will this crossover actually go? Because a short appearance would be exciting, but a meaningful connection between Casey and the Dutton world could completely change the direction of the season. The most logical path is Casey following Weaver into Texas while trying to locate Tate. Every clue could lead him deeper into a conflict he never expected to become part of. And the further he goes, the more likely it becomes that he will cross paths with Beth and Rip. But Casey cannot stay in Texas forever. His main mission is still Tate. That means every decision has to bring him closer to his son. And Weaver knows this. He could use Tate to control Casey's movements, forcing him to follow a trail that eventually leads straight into the middle of the Duttons' own problems. Casey could suddenly find himself caught between two dangerous conflicts, with no easy way out. That is where Beth could become the difference. She may know the people Casey is dealing with, she may understand the land war better than he does. And more importantly, she knows what it takes to protect a family when powerful enemies are trying to take everything away. But Beth helping Casey would not mean she suddenly becomes his partner. She would have her own agenda, and that could create a very interesting alliance. Casey needs Tate. Beth needs to protect her family. Rip wants to eliminate anyone threatening them. And Weaver wants control. Those goals could collide in one massive confrontation. There is also a chance the crossover could reveal something bigger about Weaver's operation. If his plans involve multiple ranches, land deals, or powerful business connections, then Casey's investigation may expose a network far larger than the one he started chasing in Season 1. And if Beth discovers that network is coming after her family too, she would have every reason to join the fight. That could lead to the moment fans are waiting for. Casey and Beth finally standing on the same side, not because they suddenly trust each other, but because they realize they have the same enemy. And when that happens, Weaver could be in serious trouble. Still, I don't think Season 2 will give Casey an easy victory. The Season 1 finale already showed us that this story is willing to put major characters in real danger. The ambush proved that nobody on Casey's team is completely safe. Cal's health crisis makes his future uncertain, and Tate's kidnapping raises the emotional stakes even higher. So the biggest question may not be whether Casey finds Tate. It may be what happens to him after he does. Will Casey still be the same man, or will the fight against Weaver turn him into someone much closer to Beth? Because if Casey starts abandoning the rules to protect his son, the line between lawman and revenge-driven father could become very thin. And Beth may be the one person who understands exactly what he is going through. That could make their relationship one of the most interesting parts of the season, but there is one final possibility that fans should keep in mind. What if Beth's return is not simply connected to Tate? What if it is setting up something much bigger for the future? A crossover could introduce characters, locations, and conflicts that continue beyond Season 2. If the writers want to expand the universe, Casey's journey into Texas could be the perfect bridge between these stories. And that would make Beth's appearance much more important than a simple surprise. It could be the beginning of a completely new chapter. For now, Casey has 3 major problems. Tate is still in danger. Weaver is still one step ahead. And Casey's own team is struggling to recover from the events of Season 1. Add Beth and Rip into that situation, and the pressure becomes almost impossible to control. That is why Marshals Season 2 could be much bigger than anyone expected. The story started with Casey trying to protect his family and deal with a dangerous land conflict. But now, the fight could be moving across state lines and pulling him into the wider Yellowstone world. And if Beth really is coming back, fans should be ready. Because when Beth Dutton enters a conflict, things rarely stay quiet for long. So what do you think? Will Casey actually cross paths with Beth in Season 2? Will Beth help him rescue Tate? Or could their first meeting turn into a confrontation? And if Casey and Beth finally stand together against Weaver, could we be looking at one of the biggest Yellowstone universe crossovers yet? Let me know what you think in the comments, and stay tuned for more Marshals Season 2 updates and theories.